Welcome to tonight's death row dinner. This is one of the stranger final meals and I will be preparing it myself. I'm going to go and do that, and once it's ready, I'll tell you all about Judi Buenoano. I did warn you this was a bit of a strange one. For her final meal, Judi Buenoano enjoyed, at least I presume she enjoyed, asparagus, tomatoes, strawberries, and a mug of Earl Grey tea. Now, some sources say tomatoes and some say it was just the asparagus, strawberries and tea. I'm having the tomatoes because even this, whilst very, very healthy, it's not going to fill me up, and I will need a big dose of carbs and protein once this video has been made. I boiled these for 4 minutes. I am just going to eat everything with my fingers because it's easier than fiddling about with cutlery. So can't say I'm looking forward to this food as much as some of the others, but Judi's story is a very interesting tale. You'll notice this is a pretty huge mug of tea because this could be another lengthy video. Just warning you. On the 4th of April, 1943, 34-year-old Jesse Welty and his wife, 30-year-old Mary Lou, had their third child in Quanta, Texas. They named her Judi Anna Lou, or Judi for short. She had an elder brother named Gerald and an elder sister whose name I have been unable to find. At some point, the couple also had a fourth child, a son called Robert. Jesse worked as an itinerant farmer travelling around the state rather than having a fixed farm of his own. Just 3 years after her birth, Judi's mother, Mary, caught tuberculosis and very sadly passed away. Her death was in February, and this left Jesse with 4 children, one of whom was still an infant. This was far from ideal, particularly with the family's somewhat nomadic lifestyle. Judi would attest that her mother was a member of, and I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly, but apologies, I probably will get it wrong, the Mesquite Apache tribe, a tribe which has never actually existed. Not really a tea drinker or a fan of tea, but it'll do. Jesse made the decision to put his 2 older children up for adoption. Judi and Robert, however, were sent to live with their grandparents, Joseph and Adelia, in Ohio. To say that Judi had an unstable start in life would probably be an understatement. In 1955, Jesse took a second wife, Billie Jean Martin, and he brought the now 12-year-old Judi and her brother Robert to live with them in Roswell, New Mexico. Billie had previously been married twice, and she had 3 children from the marriage to her first husband, Robert. 2 sons, Ronald and Bobby, and a daughter named Patsy. Patsy eventually married her stepbrother Gerald in 1962, but I digress. Judi claimed that both her father and her stepmother physically abused her, beating, starving, and burning her with cigarettes. She said that she was forced to work like a slave around the house. At the age of 14, Judi could take it no more. She scolded her stepbrothers with hot grease and attacked her father and stepmother with her feet, fists, and any nearby object that could be used as a projectile. This landed the teenager in prison, serving a 60-day sentence. She was not in a juvenile facility. She was imprisoned in an adult women's jail with many women who were serving time for prostitution. Once Judi had served her sentence, the judge asked her whether she wanted to return to her family home or if she would rather attend reform school. Judi picked the latter, perhaps an indication of just how unbearable she found her home life to be. She remained at Foothills High School in Albuquerque until she graduated in 1959 at the age of 16. She made no secret of the fact that she despised her family, including her younger brother Robert. Judi returned to Roswell in 1960, where she began working as a nurse's aide. She did this using the fake name Anna Schultz, and in 1961 she gave birth to her first child, a son whom she named Michael. Judi was unmarried at this time and refused to ever confirm the identity of Michael's father, though many suspected he was probably a pilot from the nearby Air Force Base. On the 21st of January 1962, Judi got married to an officer from that same Air Force Base, James Goodyear. 4 years later, in 1966, they welcomed their son into the world, and he was also named James. To celebrate this event, James Goodyear Sr. formally adopted Michael into the family. They moved to Orlando, Florida, and it was there in 1967 that their daughter Kim was born. 1 year after this, Judi opened Conway Acres Childcare Centre and listed her husband James as a co-owner of the business, though he actually continued his role within the Air Force. Shortly after Judi had opened this centre, James was actually sent on a tour of Vietnam. This left Judi to run the centre and raise her 3 children alone. He returned home in 1971, but after barely 3 months back with his family, he was admitted to the US Naval Hospital in Orlando. James was suffering with symptoms consistent with those of a stomach virus, but he also experienced numbness in his hands and his feet. Despite their best efforts, medics were unable to get to the bottom of what was causing James's illness, and his condition continued deteriorating. He even began hallucinating, believing there were rabbits in his bed. On September 15th, 1971, James Goodyear passed away at the age of only 37. His cause of death was determined to be a cardiac arrest. Judi spent 5 days grieving before cashing in his 3 life insurance policies. As if losing her husband wasn't tragedy enough, Judi's house caught fire later that year. Thankfully, there were no fatalities, and the home was insured, allowing Judi to claim $90,000. Judi had, by now, had quite enough of Orlando, so she took her 3 children and made a fresh start in Pensacola. Not long after this move, in 1973, Judi began dating a man named Bobby Joe Morris. They moved in together, and for a time life seemed to be good. However, Michael began causing problems for his mother. He was disruptive in school and scored below average in IQ tests. Since the death of James, Michael was no longer entitled to treatment at any residential facilities for the families of military men. Judi was able to get an evaluation for her son at a state hospital in 1974, and she made the decision to hand him over to foster care with a provision for psychiatric treatment. In 1977, Bobby Joe moved to Trinidad in Colorado. He invited Judi and her family to move in with him there. Judi agreed, but she still had some business to attend to in Pensacola, so she joined him after a few months. Luckily, Judi had a home to go to because her Pensacola home caught fire. Once again, though, Judi was insured, and she was able to collect a nice payout to see her on her way. Judi took Michael out of foster care, and she and her 3 children went to join Bobby Joe in Trinidad. Despite not being married to Bobby Joe, Judi took his surname and started calling herself Judi Morris. However, tragedy was to strike once again. Only a few months after Judi joined him in Trinidad, Bobby Joe fell seriously ill. He was admitted to San Rafael Hospital on January 4th, 1978, and doctors were unable to find out what exactly had struck him. Much like James Goodyear, Bobby Joe was exhibiting symptoms very similar to those of a stomach virus, but he was also experiencing excruciating pains in his chest and his extremities. After 2 days in hospital, his condition had improved enough for him to be allowed to return home. Sadly, this improvement did not last, and just a couple of days later, he collapsed at the dinner table and had to be rushed back into hospital. Judi was a devoted partner, spending hours by Bobby's bedside while doctors ran a barrage of tests trying to find out what was making him so unwell. Judi was not the only woman to visit Bobby Joe in hospital, however. His mother was also spending time with her ill son. She noticed that Judi would bring in fruit punch for Bobby to drink, and if he wouldn't drink it voluntarily, she would force it down his throat. She certainly found this suspicious, particularly as Bobby's health continued to decline. It was on the 21st of January, 1978, that Bobby Joe Morris finally succumbed to his illness. A routine autopsy was conducted, and his death was attributed to a cardiac arrest, along with metabolic acidosis. He was also just 37. Early in February, Judi was able to collect on a life insurance policy on Bobby. Bobby's family suspected that she was not only involved somehow in his death, but that he was not her only victim. Judi and Bobby had been visiting Brewton, Alabama in 1974. This was Bobby's hometown, and whilst they were there, a male Floridian was found dead in a motel. He had been shot in the chest with a .22 caliber weapon and his throat slashed. It was an anonymous call that led police to the discovery of the body, and this call was traced to a public payphone. Police were unable to find any fingerprints in the room. No bullet was recovered, and no obvious suspects presented themselves. As news of this slaying spread around Brewton, Bobby's mother claims to have overheard Judi telling Bobby, "The son of a bitch shouldn't have come up here in the first place. He knew if he came up here he was gonna die." On his deathbed, in a state of delirium, Bobby blurted out, "Judi, we never should have done that terrible thing." Now that Bobby was dead, there was nothing to keep Judi and her children in Colorado. She made the decision to move all of them back to Pensacola. On the 3rd of May, 1978, she changed her surname to Buenoano, the Spanish equivalent of good year. She never gave an explanation for this name change, though some think it was a kind of tribute to her first husband, James Goodyear, and also a nod to her mother's non-existent Apache heritage. The family settled into a home on Whisper Pine Drive. However, Michael once again found himself struggling with school. He dropped out in his sophomore year and in June 1979 enlisted with the Army. He was assigned to Fort Benning in Georgia after completing his basic training. He had a few free days before he needed to head to his new base, so he decided to visit his mother at her Florida home. On November the 6th, Michael arrived at Fort Benning. Very shortly after his arrival, Michael began exhibiting some very strange symptoms, usually associated with something like heavy metal poisoning. Army physicians ran blood tests and they discovered that Michael had 7 times the normal level of arsenic in his blood. By this time, there really was nothing they could do to reverse the destructive effects of the poison on his body. After 6 weeks in the hospital, his arm and lower leg muscles had suffered nerve damage to the extent that he lost the use of his hands and was unable to walk without the aid of metal braces. Michael underwent 3 months of treatment at Walter Reed Hospital. He was then transferred to a veterans hospital in Tampa so that he could be nearer to his mother. As well as his 2 leg braces, he had also been fitted with a prosthetic on his right arm. Together, these weighed a total of 60 pounds, which is about 27 kilos. Unable to continue his role within the army, he was discharged on 12 May 1980 and returned home to his mother. Judi came to collect him, and she was told it was highly unlikely he would ever regain full use of his limbs, and that she would need to take his limitations into consideration. Judi informed staff that she had spent over $40,000 having the necessary modifications made to her home so that Michael's needs could be accommodated. Satisfied with this, staff were happy for Michael to be taken home, arrangements having been made for him to continue his rehabilitation at Pensacola Hospital. Judi decided it would be nice for the family to have a day out to go canoeing on Florida's East River. Michael was very much looking forward to spending some time outdoors, having been mostly confined to a hospital bed for months. The canoe that Judi had hired for the expedition was only a 2-seater. Kim, Judi's daughter, remained on the bank, and Judi set up a deck chair in the middle of the canoe for Michael to sit on. She and her other son James would do the paddling. The trio spent about an hour fishing, and whilst they were doing this, the canoe was just gently drifting about a mile from where they had launched. Somehow, whilst they were out on the water, the canoe capsized. A man named Ricky Hicks had been fishing nearby, and whilst he didn't witness the accident, he did see the upturned canoe and 2 people in the water. Approaching to see what had happened, he was told by the woman in the water that a snake had fallen into the canoe. She had been attempting to hold it down with a paddle, when somehow the canoe just flipped. The other person, a younger male, was Judi's son, James. Judi showed a lot of concern for him as he claimed that he had actually been knocked unconscious in the accident. Ricky was therefore quite surprised by the apparent lack of any emotion when she explained to him that her other son, Michael, had also been in the canoe. But there would be no point in trying to rescue him due to his condition and to the weight of the prosthetic and metal braces. Just as Ricky was about to head off to get more help, Judi asked him if she could have one of his beers. He obliged and observed her as she drank it calmly. Later, a rescue team would find Michael's body about a quarter of a mile from where Judi and James had been rescued from the water. He was found not to be wearing the life jacket that Judi had initially told authorities he had on. She then admitted he hadn't been wearing one at all. The doctor who had been treating Michael was utterly astounded when he heard the details of the accident. Judi was well aware that not only was Michael incapable of swimming, there was no way he could hold, let alone cast, a fishing line. The doctor could not understand why Judi would have put her son in such a precarious position. There was little investigation into the death, as police believed Judi's version of events. Michael had a life insurance policy that he had obtained through the military, plus several other policies which Judi had taken out on him. She was the sole beneficiary of all these policies and received close to $100,000 to help take the edge off the loss of her eldest child. She put most of this money into opening a hair and beauty salon in Gulf Breeze, Pensacola. But she did splash out on a Corvette and some expensive jewellery for herself. In February of 1981, she began dating a local businessman named John Gentry, finding his wealth highly attractive. Judi wanted to impress John, telling him she had PhDs in both biochemistry and psychology from the University of Alabama, and that she had formerly worked as the head of nursing for the West Florida Hospital. If John had any questions about why somebody so well qualified was working in a hair and beauty salon, he kept these to himself. He showered Judi with lavish gifts and expensive holidays. After dating for about 6 months, the couple decided to move in together. This was in August 1982. In October of that year, Judi suggested that it would be a good idea for the couple to take out life insurance policies on one another. John felt this was sensible and took out a $50,000 life insurance policy. Judi increased this to $100,000, but neglected to inform John she had made this change. In another cruel twist of fate, it was in the December that John fell extremely ill, having to spend 12 days in hospital, one of which was Christmas Day. Doctors had no idea what was causing John's illness. However, during his stay in hospital, he did significantly improve. Judi, whom he believed was a nurse, had recently started giving him vitamin pills. He took these without question, and when he began feeling dizzy and nauseous a few days after starting them, Judi suggested that he should up the dose. Once he was discharged, Judi tried to press the vitamins on him right away. He took them for a couple of days, but then he began to feel unwell again. So when Judi tried to give them to him the following day, he refused to take them. She made her displeasure at this clear, but John refused to concede, and for some reason, he decided to keep the vitamin pills she had given him, putting them in a zip pocket in his briefcase. John enjoyed 6 months of good health, forgetting all about the vitamin pills that Judi had been getting him to take. On June the 15th, 1983, Judi told John that she was pregnant and arranged a celebration dinner for the family at the Driftwood restaurant in Pensacola. John was at work, so he and Judi arrived in separate vehicles. He had planned to pick up his mother on the way to the restaurant, but she was feeling unwell, so John arrived alone. Judi was very insistent that he park his car in a particular spot. John found this a little strange, but he was caught up in what for him was wonderful news, so he just parked where she told him to. The evening and the celebration dinner went very well. Towards the end, Judi asked John if he would mind popping out to an off-licence to get a bottle of champagne, and that way the couple could continue the celebrations in private on their own once they got home. John was thrilled and excited at the prospect of becoming a father, and he was more than happy to drive to a nearby liquor store. He got into his car, turned on the ignition, and the car exploded. Somehow, John was not killed in the blast, but he was badly injured. He lost parts of his kidneys, liver, stomach, and intestines. Judi had come running out of the restaurant as soon as she heard the noise, cradling his head and telling him that she loved him, as she and many onlookers awaited the arrival of emergency services. Paramedics were able to stabilise John, but he still spent the next month in intensive care. This was followed by another 2 months on a special care ward. He was lucky to be alive and extremely grateful that his mother had not been with him at the time. John was visited by police investigating the car bombing early on in his recovery. They were aware that he was badly injured, but they wanted to get his statement as soon as possible in the event he didn't pull through. John revealed to them not only the fact that he and Judi had only recently taken out life insurance policies on one another, but he also mentioned that he had been admitted to hospital the previous December with a mysterious illness. He told them he suspected that the vitamin pills Judi had been giving to him might somehow be involved with this illness. And when police heard that he had kept a couple of these pills, they took them so that they could be tested. John was shocked when he found out that background checks had been run on Judi, and she had lied to him about her qualifications and previous employment. However, what hurt John the most was the lie she had told him about being pregnant with his child. Judi was not, and never had been pregnant with John's child. She had in fact undergone sterilisation surgery a decade earlier. Tests carried out on the vitamin pills showed that they contained paraformaldehyde. This is related to formaldehyde, which you're probably familiar with, and this can be lethal even in fairly small doses. It is a corrosive and toxic substance. Interviews with some of Judi's friends revealed that she had been telling them for months that John had a terminal illness. She had recently booked a cruise for herself and her 2 remaining children, but had not booked a ticket for John. This suggested that she had not expected John to be alive when it was time for the holiday to begin. Despite all this, police were unable to prove that Judi had deliberately tried to poison John, though they most certainly drew that conclusion. They needed further evidence in order to be able to charge her with attempted murder. They were able to enlist the help of federal authorities to trace the origins of the dynamite used in the manufacture of the car bomb. This led them to one of Judi's friends in Alabama. This friend claimed that the dynamite had actually been stolen from the back of his truck a few nights previously because, you know, if you've got a truckload of explosives, you're just going to leave them in the back of the van overnight, aren't you? I mean, it's not like you're going to want to make sure they're secure and safe or anything. Phone records showed that he and Judi had actually been in regular contact up until the day before the explosion. This was enough to obtain a search warrant for Judi's home. Wire and tape identical to those used in the car bomb were found in Judi's bedroom. In James's room, they found some marijuana and a sawn-off shotgun. Typical teenage boy. James was arrested both for possession of drugs and an illegal weapon. Judi was arrested for attempted murder. However, she was able to attain bail for this charge while the investigations continued. Looking deeper into her past, police discovered the details of the tragic drowning of her son Michael and the sudden deaths of her previous boyfriend and husband. They re-examined the 3 deaths, concerned that they may be dealing with a serial killer. On the 11th of January 1984, whilst she was still out on bail, Judi was rearrested. This time she was charged with the first-degree murder of Michael and grand theft over the insurance payouts. When she found out that she could not be bailed on these additional charges, she faked an epileptic fit. Her efforts earned her a night in hospital for observation, after which she was returned to jail. Whilst she was languishing in her cell, further tests were being conducted, with the exhumation of Bobby Joe in February and James Goodyear in March. Both men were found to have died as a result of arsenic poisoning. Judi was tried separately for each of these crimes. The trial for the murder of Michael commenced on March 22nd, 1984. Testimony was given by several witnesses that Judi's relationship with her other 2 children had been much closer than her relationship with her eldest son. Some even expressed that she had been ashamed of him and made him leave the house whenever she had visitors over. As well as being born out of wedlock, his struggles at school and his emotional difficulties were viewed by Judi as a sign of weakness, something she could not tolerate. The prosecution pointed out that the canoe happened to capsize at one of the very few points along the river that was completely secluded, thus ensuring there could be no witnesses. They put the case that Judi deliberately forced Michael out of the canoe once she was sure she could not be observed. Ricky Hicks was brought in to testify about Judi's slightly odd behaviour after he had helped to rescue her and her son James, and when he took them to meet up with Kim where she was waiting for them on the shore, Kim did not seem to be surprised that Michael wasn't with them. On June the 6th, 1984, Judi Buenoano was found guilty of murdering her son Michael. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. She was also given an additional 15 years for the insurance fraud which she had committed. She was then tried for the attempted murder of John Gentry, and her son James also faced his own trial with regards to this crime. The prosecution alleged that it was James who had put the bomb into Gentry's car, but they did not have the evidence to back up this claim. He was acquitted. Judi, however, was found guilty, and a further 12 years added to her already lengthy sentence. On October 22nd, 1985, Judi went on trial for the murder of her first husband, James Goodyear. She denied that she had done anything and couldn't explain why such high levels of arsenic were found in his system. She swung between tears and arrogance while she was being examined and cross-examined. The prosecution were permitted to present evidence linked to the other cases, as well as the amounts of money that she had fraudulently claimed on these deaths. This amounted to some $240,000. Judi stated that if she had indeed given contaminated vitamin pills to John Gentry, this had been completely accidental. This was somewhat undermined by her former best friend, Constance Lang, who testified that Judi had once told her they could end their unhappy marriages by putting arsenic in their husband's food. At the time, Constance hadn't realised Judi was being serious. Shortly after this, Constance ended her marriage by the conventional means of getting a divorce. Meanwhile, Judi's husband, James Goodyear, died. Judi was willing to admit that she had received the insurance payments. However, she strongly denied killing anybody. The jury deliberated for 10.5 hours before they returned with a verdict: guilty on the count of first-degree murder. Florida is a death penalty state, and so this was the avenue that the prosecution wished to pursue. There was a 2-day sentencing hearing presided over by Judge Emerson Thompson. Whilst the jury backed the death penalty, it was only the judge who had the power to impose it. On November 26, 1985, he did just that. He sentenced Judi Buenoano to death in the electric chair. No trial was conducted for Bobby Joe's murder in Colorado, since Florida had already passed the harshest possible sentence. However, should Judi successfully appeal this death sentence, Colorado State were more than happy to then pursue a conviction. Throughout her time on death row, Judi insisted on her innocence. She was confident that since no woman had been executed in the state of Florida for over 150 years, she would not actually face execution. Upon first entering the appeals process, Judi was confident that her sentence would be overturned. She attested that she had been defamed by lies told by the prosecutors in all 3 trials, and that she had been portrayed as a black widow and a monster. The juries had been swayed by this, and she was an innocent woman. Every appeal reached the same conclusion: Judi was guilty and should therefore be put to death. Judi's execution date was set for March 30th, 1998, 13 years after she first entered the Broward Correctional Center at Pembroke Pines, Florida. She had exhausted the appeals process, and the only thing that could save her now would be a grant of clemency. She told a reporter at the time that she was tired of fighting for her life and her innocence, but she did not want to die. She was to be executed at the state penitentiary at Stark, and this would be carried out in the 75-year-old electric chair. She spent her final hours with her children, James and Kim. Kim had protested her mother's innocence, But once it became clear that Judi was not going to have her death sentence overturned, she began to protest instead the method of execution. She wanted her mother to be given a lethal injection and cited the case of Pedro Medina to back this. The previous year, he had been executed in the same electric chair that Judi would face. However, during the process, the mask covering his head caught light. Nobody knew whether or not Pedro was actually dead when this happened, and it prompted the governor at the time to say that he would consider more humane methods of execution. This incident was put down to human error rather than any malfunction or fault with the electric chair itself, so Judi would still have to face it. Judi Buenoano was 54 years old. She insisted that she was no longer afraid to die. Her main concern was leaving her children without a mother, and that her grandson would never get to see her proven innocent. Her head was shaved the evening prior to the execution. This was to prevent her hair from catching fire. At 7:02 a.m., she entered the chamber, accompanied by several guards. 8 straps were used to secure her in the large oak chair. Electrodes were then attached to her calves and head. Damp sponges used to ensure they would conduct efficiently. She was asked if she had any last words. She said she didn't, and then she closed her eyes. She kept them squeezed tightly shut, not looking at the people who were there to witness her execution. A leather mask was then placed over her head. At 7:08 a.m., the electrocution cycle began. At 7:13 a.m., Judi Buenoano was pronounced dead. Judi was someone who betrayed those closest to her in the worst possible way. She never admitted her guilt and thus never showed any remorse. It is believed that her motivation for these crimes was sheer greed, the arsons and the murders. Her desire to get her hands on the hefty insurance payouts was greater than her love for her partners, for her son. Right up until the end, she never showed the weakness she held such contempt for. But in doing so, perhaps she sealed her own fate. If she had shown any signs of sorrow or remorse, then perhaps the judge would have been more lenient. Thank you for watching this video and for hearing the full details of this case. As ever, I will leave you with the faces of the innocent people whose lives were stolen by someone who should have cared for them, who should have loved them, who they should have been able to trust.